Hello and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this program today, we'll be discussing the historic plight and struggle for Soviet Jewry until the collapse of communism and the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. The Jewish community in the former Soviet Union faced incredible discrimination and persecution. This was until President Ronald Reagan and our Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher took up the cause of Soviet Jewry. And my guest today was very influential in persuading Margaret Thatcher to take up the plight and the cause of the Soviet Jewry, which today over 1 million Jews from the former Soviet Union have made Aliyah to Israel. And this is their remarkable story. I'm joined today as my guest by Dr. Lionel Kopelowitz. Lionel, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the Middle East Report today. And you were the president of the Board of Deputies from 1985 to 1991. But can you share with our viewers how you became involved in Jewish politics and how you came to represent the entire Jewish community in Great Britain?
Yes, well, I have to go back an awful long way, Simon, because I really began to take an interest in Jewish affairs when I was an undergraduate at Cambridge. I was a member of the Cambridge University Jewish Society, and this was 1944-45, when we got reports from first-hand reports of people who'd been to visit Bergen-Belsen, and they told us of the tragedy, the thousands, tens of thousands who were dead, the few remaining who were like skeletons. And, you know, this had a tremendous emotive effect upon me. And at the same time, there was the great demand for a home for Jews, particularly those in Europe who were stateless. And, of course, there was an intensification of the Zionist program for a Jewish state, and the United Nations resolution on Palestine of 29th of November 1947, where there was a two-thirds majority in the General Assembly for both a Jewish state and an Arab state. Well, you can imagine for people like myself, these were historic dates and momentous times. And that spurred me on to take a continuing interest in everything Jewish. And after I became qualified as a medical practitioner, and I joined my father in medical practice in Newcastle upon Tyne, I became very involved in all Jewish activities in Newcastle, which was a relatively small Jewish community. And ultimately, I became president of the Representative Council for Newcastle Jewry, held the office for 6 years, from 1967 to 1973, and pari passu I had become involved and interested in all national Jewish affairs and international Jewish affairs. I've been a member of the Board of Deputies since 1951, so that it was a gradual progression. I can't call it more than that.
Incredible. And you're also described as the father of the board, affectionately.
Yes, but I am the father of the board now because I've served longer than anybody else. I've been a member of the board without interruption since my election in June 1951, when King George VI was on the throne, Mr. Attlee was Prime Minister, Mr. Herbert Morrison was Foreign Secretary, and Mr. Winston Churchill, as he then was leader of the opposition.
Amazing. Absolutely incredible times. Well, thanks to Jerry Lewis. He introduced me to you at the Yom Ha'atzmaut celebration organised by the Israeli Embassy and the Israeli ambassador. So I'm very grateful to Jerry for introducing me to you. Lionel, can you tell us what is the role and the function of the Board of Deputies? Because you told me, which is incredible, that the Board of Deputies has been around since 1760 and represents the entire Jewish community and the link between the government and the Jewish community.
Yes, well, the board began to function actively around 1835, but it takes its origin as 1760 because when King George III ascended the throne, the small Sephardi Jewish community in the city of London decided it would be a good idea to send a deputation to meet the new king at Buckingham House, as it was then called, and to give an expression of loyalty to the king. And they appointed representatives, and the word in Portuguese was deputados, which the word deputies comes, and they saw the king. But then, a week later, the Ashkenazi Jewish community, which are Jews mainly of European origin, Central European origin, they were affronted that they hadn't been joined in the delegation, and they sent a second delegation to see the king.
Amazing.
But then they both realized this was not a clever way to go on, and they said in future, in all public relations matters, we'd act jointly. And that acting jointly is the beginning of the Board of Deputies. And that's why we take it from 1760. But the board's function always over the decades has been to defend and protect the Jewish community and to ensure that all forms of discrimination against Jews are eliminated and erased. I mean, for example, at the present time, we defend always shechita, that's a Jewish method of slaughter of animals. And we defend the right of Jews to undertake circumcision, which is an absolute sine qua non as far as Jews are concerned. We always counter anti-Semitism in all its forms. We oppose discrimination, for example, in things like schools, and make sure that examinations are not held on the Jewish holidays. But any form of discrimination against Jews is part of the board's agenda. But beyond that, the board has always had an international view in that it has always spoken up for those Jewish communities which cannot speak up for themselves. Now, that isn't much of a problem today because most Jewish communities have representative bodies, but it was a big problem in the latter part of the 19th century. And I can only give you one example. At the Congress of Berlin in 1878, when Disraeli said he came back with peace, with honor from Berlin, the Board of Deputies had sent a memorandum to Lord Salisbury, the foreign minister, about the position of Jews in the new emerging country of Romania. That was just one pure example of what the board did.
Amazing. And we've got a clip to go to now that looks at some of the incredible work being carried out by the Board of Deputies in representing the Jewish community here in Great Britain.
In Britain today, the freedoms we enjoy cannot be taken for granted. Our Jewish way of life is under pressure. So the Jewish population needs to be represented, promoted and safeguarded. And that is the role of the Board of Deputies of British Jews.
I don't think people are aware just how much effort goes in to protecting and promoting Jewish life in this country, because when things work well, you don't notice them. No news is good news.
So what is the board?
The Board of Deputies really is a democratic organisation that represents the entire Jewish community, and our nearly 300 representatives come from individual synagogue organisations, but also communal organisations.
Yes, it's crucial that the board is democratically elected. It gives them authority, it gives them a mandate, and it proves to members of Parliament and to the government that the people you're dealing with have the authority of the community they're representing.
For parliamentarians, it's very important to know that there is a single point of contact with British Jews.
The full-time staff at the Board of Deputies, all of whom have their own individual expertise, combine fantastically with the deputies and their experience to make the Jewish community a vibrant part of the fabric of modern-day Britain.
But the board's role is also proactive. Lobbying, speaking out, reaching out and influencing. We help protect the way kosher food is produced. We ensure mainstream medical ethics are not in conflict with Jewish practices, including the right to circumcise. The board represents people who have problems when their work or exam schedules coincide with the Sabbath or other holy days. And it maintains Jewish cemeteries that are no longer in use. Our professional staff provide up-to-date statistics.
Welcome back to the Middle East Report, and that clip gave us some insight into some of the vital work being carried out by the Board of Deputies on behalf of the Jewish community here in Britain. Lionel, you were President of the Board of Deputies from 1985 to 1991. What were some of the biggest challenges and difficulties you faced during your presidency?
Well, the biggest challenges really were on the international field. One, of course, was the whole problem about Soviet Jewry and how to bring to government, and to the Prime Minister in particular, the urgent problem facing Jews who were discriminated against in the Soviet Union, not so much through physical persecution, but rather through the denial of all forms of Jewish communal activity, synagogues being closed, no Hebrew classes, no form of Jewish education. That was one major issue. And the other one, of course, was the whole question of Israel's future consequent upon the 1967 Six-Day War and the Yom Kippur War of 1973, and the need to try and intensify the peace process. Now, remember, these things are still going on now, but this was a very, very urgent and important matter, and Israel wouldn't speak to the PLO, and I took the view that the board should stand by Israel in these matters, because as long as the PLO did not recognize Israel's right to exist in secure and recognized boundaries, and as long as the PLO did not renounce terrorism in all its forms, I couldn't see how we could talk to them.
No, which is, you can ask the same question today. Have they truly renounced violence? Have they still recognized Israel's right to exist, to live in peace with secure boundaries and borders? That's still the question mark even today. The
problem still exists today. You see, people say that Mr. Netanyahu isn't speaking to Hamas and Hezbollah. And I always say, if you want to make peace, you've got to have a partner for peace. And you can't have a partner for peace who starts by denying your right to exist. I mean, after all, France and Germany reached at each other's throats for nearly 200 years. But France never said Germany must be destroyed. Germany never said France must be destroyed. Nor did they teach the children in the schools that sort of anti-policy. No, in a lot of the schools in the West Bank, Israel doesn't even appear on the map. It doesn't exist. Now, how can you begin to talk when that situation pertains?
No, I agree with you, but I think that'll be for a different programme, Lionel. Very important programme, but for a different one. Going back to the plight of Soviet Jewry, according to my research in the 1960s, over 100 Jews were executed in the former Soviet Union on trumped-up charges. Systematically, synagogues were closed down. Large books were written in which they were anti-Semitic in nature, and many of them described the fact that Judaism was like a Nazi-like religion. Can you describe some of the persecution and the difficulty facing the Soviet Jewry during the time of the communist rule in the former Soviet Union?
Yes, well, there were episodes of physical persecution and killings, but beyond that, the main concern was that synagogues were closed, there was no form of Jewish education, so that the ability to live as a Jew was virtually stamped out. You couldn't get kosher meat or anything like that, but the ability to live as a Jew was virtually rubbed off the agenda. It was a most pernicious form of anti-Jewish activity. I mean, that's much worse, really, than physical persecution, was the denial of all forms of Jewish practice. And it was really after the Six-Day War that the nascent Jewish community in the Soviet Union began to sit up, began to shout, and the shouting was echoed throughout the Jewish world.
And we got a clip to go to now. It's entitled the 25th anniversary for the March of Soviet Jewry in Washington. And this is the talking about the historic struggle that emerged for the cause of Soviet Jewry.
The Soviet Jewry movement recognized that Jews in the Soviet Union were being badly mistreated.
We were discriminated against. There were no Jewish schools, there were no opportunity to go to synagogues.
Jews were not only deprived of their freedom, they were deprived of their identity.
There was a belief that Gorbachev would come to the United States. What were we going to do? How were we going to respond, galvanize?
The Federation movement recognized this was an important moment in Jewish history and a potential turning point.
This was not an event where you RSVP'd and we knew how many people were coming for dinner.
With only 32 days, one might think that federations would have shied away from such a formidable challenge. But the fact is, within moments, federations recognized they could do this.
There was no internet, there was no CNN, but there was a huge flood of American Jews.
On December 6, 1987, American Jews organized this incredible rally.
250,000 plus Jews and non-Jews gathered in Washington to show support and to demand freedom for Soviet Jews.
As we got into this and began to sense momentum, the formulation that we used was, we think will be the largest Jewish gathering in Washington history.
The march started at the Ellipse, which is behind the White House, and marched down Constitution Avenue.
You could see a vast number of people and signs from various communities throughout the United States.
Michael and Sergei, who was about 14 at the time, went to the march, and they were really excited about it.
You know, the crowd was very patient. And I think the reason was because they knew they were part of something historic.
And it's a story not only of rescue and bringing people to freedom, but also of how we're all connected.
When you liberate people, when you give them pathways to freedom, you don't just benefit them. All the world benefits from that.
The impact of those former Soviet Jews is tremendous. 5 Nobel Prize winners, numerous medical innovations, Google. I mean, tremendous impact.
I think it's Jewish Federations have been instrumental in this. They really catapulted the whole issue to the front pages, to the front of the minds of every household of the Jewish community here.
Federations have the unique ability to respond by finding Jews in their local communities and making them realize they're part of something far larger than just their individual concerns.
Freedom 25 is an effort to elevate understanding of the Soviet Jewry movement and the lessons that it has for contemporary times and for the future.
Freedom 25 has a great opportunity to remind the American Jewish community what's possible.
People understand that freedom is an amazing gift, and a very fragile gift, and we need to know why we have it and how not to destroy it.
When people care, they get involved. When they get involved, they make a difference.
and we have to continue to make a difference.
We must be committed to justice, not just for Jews, but for all people.
The moment you rediscover this connection between your daily life and this long, interesting, and exciting history, it gives you a lot of strength.
If I took it for granted back then that Jews could sing together, I no longer take it for granted. It's embedded and imprinted in me as a memory of Jewish peoplehood.
I think back to those times when we were able to put aside our differences and come together for the greater good. And my hope is that if we have to, we'll be able to do that again.
Welcome back to the Middle East Report. Lionel, in 1964, the Student Struggle for Soviet Jewry was founded in New York, which mobilized the entire American Jewish community for the cause and the plight of Soviet Jewry. Do you believe that the silence of American Jewry during World War II and the horrors of the Holocaust were a motivating factor that mobilized the Jewish communities in America to really fight for Soviet Jewry?
Well, of course, they had seen the results of Hitler's extermination program. They'd seen the loss of 6 million Jews. We'd all seen it. And we were very, very concerned that there was still a large Jewish community in the Soviet Union completely out of reach for the rest of the Jewish world. Completely out of reach. They didn't come to they couldn't get to Jewish conferences. We couldn't get there to see them, and this was a major, major issue on the world Jewish agenda. I mean, one of the early movements in England were the attempts to meet the refuseniks. You know, first to get a visa to go to Russia was difficult in the extreme. And then if you went there, the ability to see a refusenik or two was also extremely difficult, very, very difficult. But the former chief rabbi, Lord Kopelowitz, in 1975, he went to the Soviet Union. He was there for a few days, didn't meet any high officials there, but he met the refuseniks there, and he spent Saturday afternoon with them and give them some form of instruction. Of course, they took it. I mean, they grasped at it, but from then onwards, slowly but surely, attempts were made by Jews in Great Britain to go to the Soviet Union to meet the refuseniks and to help wherever we possibly could.
Oh, that's incredible. And you also, as your role as president of the Board of Deputies, you met the late Margaret Thatcher, or Baroness Thatcher. Can you describe some of the situations and the context in which you met her, but also what was she like as a woman, and what was her impact on the Jewish community?
Well, of course, I first met Margaret Thatcher. It wasn't the first time, but I first met her as president of the board in October 1985, because soon after my election, I arranged an appointment to meet her, and I brought the officers of the board with me, and we discussed all the various issues with which the board was concerned. And she cut me quite short when I discussed things like the defense of Shechita and things of that nature. She said, "My government will do nothing to interfere with the religious practices of the Jewish community." You didn't need to hear any more, did you? You knew that on the home front you were relatively safe. You were safe. But later, about 2 years later, she was going to Russia for the first time to meet Gorbachev. And I was suggested I should take a delegation to see her, and I was reluctant at first because my view was that she knew more about Soviet Jewry than I could possibly tell her. She would have her advisors. And why should I take up her time, which the Prime Minister's time is very valuable? But I then discovered if I didn't lead by taking a delegation, others would try to do it. So I took a delegation to see her. But I worked out very carefully what I would have to say to her. And you know that with all ministers, prime ministers, and all other ministers, they're receiving delegations week in and week out, day in and day out, sometimes several per day. And they all have a pencil. And if you see they're doodling with the pencil, you know they've heard it all before, and you're wasting your time carrying on. You should cut the interview short. I was terrified she might have a doodling pencil. So I worked out what to say to her. As I went into the room, I said, Prime Minister, your timing is perfect. You are going to Moscow at the most important time in the Jewish year. She looked up at me. I said, in 2 weeks' time is Passover, the festival of freedom, the time when Moses stood before Pharaoh and said, let my people go that they may serve me. And I turned to Charles Powell, who was like her chief of staff, and said, that's Exodus chapter 5, verse 10 or something. Make a note for the Prime Minister, please. And then I said, all we're asking you to do, Prime Minister, is to do a rerun of what took place 3,500 years ago, when you will be clothed in the clothes of Moses, and you will stand before the modern Pharaoh Gorbachev. And yet she took it like milk, because it was something different. I mean, then we had a very good chat about the issues, and she was very, very supportive, and said, of course, she's going to raise all these issues when she went to Moscow. But it was because I put it in a different way and said something new that I was able to catch her attention.
And as a Prime Minister, what was Margaret Thatcher like in terms of her relationship with the Jewish community in Israel? I mean, many stories have come out now since her funeral that she was such a strong supporter of Israel and the Jewish community, including having many influential Jews in her cabinet.
Well, first of all, from my point of view, she was very accessible. I mean that if you wanted to see the Prime Minister, you could get, as president of the board, you could get an appointment with her. But then she, of course, was MP for Finchley, with a sizable Jewish community there. As she mentioned to me on one occasion, there are 19 synagogues in my constituency, and I've been to every one of them. So she knew an awful lot about the Jewish community, but she was interested in Jewish issues, and she had personal Jewish friends. For example, Lord Kopelowitz, whom she raised to the peerage, and who was a chief rabbi during her period of office. She was very close to him. Why? Because he said something unusual to her. When he first met her, when she was in Mr. Edward Heath's government, and she was Education Secretary, he said to her, Mrs. Thatcher, you're a Secretary of State for Defence, aren't you? She said, no, I'm not. I'm Secretary of State for Education. And he said, education is the first defence of any community. Well, you know, that caught her attention. And then, of course, subsequently, when there was a document produced by the Archbishop of Canterbury called Faith in the City, Emmanuel Jacobus wrote a comment on it, which fitted very much in with Mrs. Thatcher's way of thinking, and all these helped, you know, to strengthen the relationship. But she also, in my period of office, addressed a meeting of the Board of Deputies of British Jews. I mean, Prime Ministers have been to dinners of the board, but there's been no Prime Minister since Margaret Thatcher who's actually addressed a full meeting of the Board of Deputies.
And this was held at 10 Downing Street?
No. The Board of Deputies, no, she came to the board. But not only did she come to the board, but when she agreed to address the board, I let Mr. Charles Powell know. I said, you know, the board meets on the third Sunday of each month, except August and September. But of course, as president, I can call a meeting of the board at any time to meet the Prime Minister's diary. She addressed the board on the third Sunday of the month of February in 1990. He came on the board Sunday. That's a tremendous honor to us, you know.
Amazing. Incredible. And in your opinion, she had an incredible partnership with the US President Ronald Reagan. How influential were both President Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher in taking up the cause of Soviet Jewry, which ultimately then led to the fall of communism and those historic scenes with the fall of the Berlin Wall in '89?
Well, I think each made a great contribution there. But the very fact that the two great Western powers, I mean, America's a much greater Western power, but the fact that America and Great Britain were seized of the urgency of the problems of Jews in the Soviet Union, that had a very galvanizing effect upon Gorbachev. And you know, when he came to London, she said, "I can do business with this man." And I remember the dinner she gave for him at number 10. I had the honor to be invited. You could see a new chapter was opening. And subsequently, I used to usually take a delegation from the board to Israel around the time of the end of December, beginning of January. And when I was there in 1990, there was a plane coming from the Soviet Union, full of Jews coming to live in Israel. And I remember it was a most moving experience to see them all coming off the plane. And one man didn't carry a suitcase. He carried a Sefer Torah, you know, the scroll of the law, the 5 books of Moses. That's what he brought with him from the Soviet Union. But I'll never forget that occasion, seeing them all coming off the plane.
That's incredible. And we've got a clip to go to now that looks at President Ronald Reagan and how he personally took up the campaign of the plight of Soviet Jewry with Mikhail Gorbachev back in the 1980s.
Gorbachev and Reagan sat down just on a one-on-one basis. Reagan started talking about the rally on the mall and said, "Have you heard about the rally?" And Gorbachev said, yes, he had heard about the rally. And Reagan then just kept talking about the fact that this is an issue that is of great importance to the American public and of great interest, therefore, to the U.S. government, and this is something that needed to be done. And as the interpreter told me, Gorbachev wanted to shift the conversation to matters involving arms control. And for quite a number of minutes, President Reagan just kept talking about the Soviet Jewry and the immigration issue. And then it took a while before it all fell into place, but there too, by the end of, as a matter of fact, by September 1988, it was done.
Hello and welcome back to the Middle East Report, and that was such a tremendous clip and incredible work carried out by President Reagan in defeating communism and expanding liberty around the world. I did a course, Lionel, on my university, part of my degree course, in which I studied American history with the University of Manchester, part of my Middle East history course, and I was absolutely fascinated to learn so much about Ronald Reagan and had the privilege of meeting so many of his advisors in Washington. Him and Margaret Thatcher were really pioneers in advocating freedom around the world. It's a shame that we don't have the same sort of caliber of leaders that are around today.
Well, Mrs. Thatcher was unusual in that she was decisive, and she was divisive as well, of course, and there was many things she did which have had an unfortunate effect upon people. I mean, the miners' strike, or she overcame the miners and the trade unions, but of course, a lot of those were thrown out of work when the mines were closed. Nothing was put in place to try and alleviate that form of suffering. But on the general view, she was a very decisive prime minister. I mean, and you've got to be a decisive person in public affairs. You can't just mumble along or bumble along. I mean, you've got to be decisive, and that was her great strength. That was a very great strength.
Very much so. You were one of the very special people to actually attend Margaret Thatcher's funeral, which was a state funeral in St. Paul's Cathedral.
The ceremonial funeral.
Ceremonial funeral. What legacy did she leave behind for the Jewish community?
Well, she left behind for the Jewish community a record of strong support. That was the first thing. A record of very strong support. She left behind a record of availability and accessibility. That's very, very important. And we haven't had in recent years that degree of accessibility that we had with Margaret Thatcher.
Interesting. And we've got a clip to go to now that this is an interview being carried out by the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at Margaret Thatcher's funeral, in which he talks about her legacy.
Well, we've just come from a very moving ceremony in honor of Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. It was deeply meaningful. I think she was a great leader, not only an economic leader, but a world leader, helping, along with President Reagan, to end the Cold War bloodlessly. That changed history. She evidently changed the history of Britain and the history of Britain's economy. But in doing so, and in doing everything else that she did as she led this country, she inspired many around the world with conviction, determination, and courage.
Welcome back to the Middle East Report. Lionel, with the fall of the Iron Curtain in 1989 and the collapse of the Soviet Union that permitted over 1 million Jews to make Aliyah to Israel, do you see the hand of God working through history with the fulfillment of what the prophet Isaiah said in chapter 43, verse 5 and 6, and I'll read it to you. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I will bring your children from the east and gather you from the west. And I shall say to the north, give them up, and to the south, do not hold them back. Bring my sons from afar and my daughters from the ends of the earth.
Well, of course, if you've got faith, and I hope most of us have, this means an awful lot when you read a sentence like that. But there's no doubt that the Jewish situation is a unique one in the world. Do you know any other people who having been persecuted over centuries, expelled from Britain in 1290, expelled from France in 1394, expelled from Spain in 1492, pogroms in Russia and in Poland, sufferings in this country and that country, and yet they always had one country they wanted to go back to. It was been in their prayers every day, the return to Jerusalem. It's been in their prayers, but they've never forgotten it. I mean, we don't hear in this country about asking to get back to Normandy, do we? I mean, William the Conqueror came from Normandy in 1066. We don't talk about Normandy, but here we go back much further, very much further. It's been part of the Jewish ethos, the return to Jerusalem, the return to Zion. And that's all essentially based on Jewish education. That's been our great strength. You know that when Jerusalem was being besieged by Titus in the year 70, and at the time of a siege, there's always two parties in the city: those who want to fight to the end, and those who want to try and make an accommodation in peace. And there's a rabbi called Yochanan ben Zakkai who was smuggled out of Jerusalem to Vespasian, the Roman general. And he said to him, I know you're going to take Jerusalem, but all I'm asking is, can I have a little college in a place called Yavne? I want to set up a little school there. I'm going to set up a school. Why not? He saw no harm in that. But that was the strength of Jewish survival, that there was going to be education of the Jewish people. And that is what has sustained us in every generation, in every decade. Sometimes it's been better than at other times. But where the education has been weak, the community has suffered as a consequence.
And you, as we've gone through the course of the programme, have said that you served on the Board of Deputies from 1985 to 1991.
As President, yeah.
As President, yeah. What are the lessons that you learnt as your role as President of the Board of Deputies, and what wisdom can you pass on to a younger generation?
The most important thing I can pass on is that you must always find the common ground which can bring the whole community together. That the unity of the Jewish community is, in my view, is terribly, terribly important. And if there's divisions in the community, we become weaker as a consequence. And that's what I've always passed on to all my successors. Find the common ground and keep the community united as far as you possibly can do.
And Lionel, we're in 2013, I think a very, very different time, and there's very different situations and challenges that Jewish community faced back then than they do now. What do you think are the big challenges facing the Jewish community in 2013?
Well, the big challenge facing the Jews internally is there's been an increase in anti-Semitism in the country. And that's a very worrying trend indeed. And we've got to use all avenues available to us to try and stamp this out. I'm a great supporter of interfaith activity. I'm a vice president of the Council of Christians and Jews. I do a lot of work there in trying to bring Jews and Christians together, because there's such a tremendous number of Christians who have only a vague knowledge of what the Jewish community is all about. And we've got to strengthen our relationship with the Christians and with the Muslims if we're going to have harmony and peace within this country.
I very much agree with your sentiments there, Lionel. Now, those who are viewers who are very passionate about Israel, they're very passionate about Jewish community and want to stand with Israel and Jewish community, how can they get involved and how can they support the Jewish community and confront anti-Semitism, but also stand up for Israel?
Well, the thing is that you can always do it in your own localities. That's the first thing. I mean, everything's, a board of deputies is a roof body, but it's only strong if it's firmly anchored to all its constituents. And you've got to start within your own locality, and you've got to take an active part and play an active role. It all starts from there. You just don't reach to the top immediately.
No, which is very true. We're down to about 4 minutes of left of the programme, Lionel, which I find really, really fascinating. Now, in terms of confronting anti-Semitism, and sadly we've seen a large rise in anti-Semitism over the last few years, not only here in Britain, but also in Europe. In my opinion, it seems far worse on the continent of Europe than it does here. What are the concrete measures that can be put in place to actually confront this evil?
Confront anti-Semitism?
Absolutely.
Mainly educational. That means that in every locality, you've got to have people who indulge in interfaith dialogue, either with Christians or with Muslims or with both. I'm a great believer in doing one thing at a time. I'm concerned with confronting Christian problems. Others do it with Muslim problems. I don't think you can do all together. But you've got to see what are the issues which divide us, what are the problems. Where the Christians are concerned, of course, there are great problems about Jerusalem. That after Jerusalem sacred to three great faiths. sacred to the Jews, sacred to the Christians, sacred to the Muslims. But there are some differences, though. For the Muslims, the great event took place in Jerusalem when Muhammad went up from the rock. But the focus of the faith has always been in Mecca and Medina. For the Christians, a great event took place in Jerusalem, and that is the crucifixion, the resurrection. But the focus of the faith has always been in Rome. For Jews...
For Catholics, that is.
Not
for Protestants.
For Jews, the great event took place outside Jerusalem on Mount Sinai, the giving of the Ten Commandments. But the focus of the faith has always been in Jerusalem ever since King David sanctified it and hallowed it, and it's been in our prayers day by day ever since. And these are the things which one has to explain to other faiths. It's going to take a long time.
Yeah. But isn't it important to emphasise and also to stress, Lionel, that it's only under Israeli control, under Israeli sovereignty, that has allowed freedom of worships for the Jewish community, for Judaism, Christianity and Islam?
Well, that's absolutely true. I mean, in the years when, between 1948 and 1967, Jews were barred from going to the old city of Jerusalem. Jews were barred from it, and that we used to stand in the new city of Jerusalem, look across the barbed wire to the old city, and you couldn't go there. You couldn't go there, and the situation, of course, has changed. It's open to all today. It's open to all.
Lionel, I just want to thank you so much for being my guest today on the Middle East Report, and thank you for so much for the wisdom, the knowledge and the insight that you've passed on to not only me but also to our viewers as well. So thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed, Simon.
And just want to thank you all for watching today's programme. And this programme really pays tribute to the great leaders such as Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, who took up the campaign and the cause of Soviet Jewry, who campaigned for their freedom and also their release, their right to practice Judaism in the former Soviet Union and their right to make Aliyah to Israel. And now, thanks to their hard work, Israel has a population of over 1 million Russians are now living in Israel. And it's an incredible story, and also fulfills biblical prophecy and fills the words of Isaiah 43, verses 5 and 6. So let's take that message and let's see the hand of God working through history as we pay tribute to those who campaigned tirelessly for the plight of Soviet Jewry. And thank you for watching today's programme.
They call me Anatole, in prison I do lie. My little window looks out on a Russian sky. I've been arrested here for crimes they have not named, but all my people know the charge will be a frame. See my accuser standing in the hall. He points his finger at us all. You now must pay the penalty for the crime of daring to be free. We are leaving Mother Russia. We have waited far too long. We are leaving Mother Russia. When they come for us, we'll be gone. For 15 centuries we've called this land our home. We love the Russian soil as much as anyone. In countless armies our young boys have died for you. But never did you call them sons, you always called them Jew. We fell in battle for the Tsar. 100,000 died at Babi Yar, and yet no monument will mark their grave. Just on our passports, the word Yevrei. We are leaving Mother Russia. We have waited far too long. We are leaving Mother Russia. When they come for us, we'll be gone.
Eisner, Trachtenberg, Goldfeld, Zorobilsky, Korenflesh, Wilbur, Chernovsky, Pechersky, Shivrievsky, Cyril Guzman, Mendel, Ruben, Zinsberg, Yakov, Kuznetsov, Svechinski, Mendeleevsky, Rusakov, Shur, Sharansky, Rodetskaya, Minsk, Schifrin, Willius, Dolman, Fedorov, Snipov, Ginsburg, Chernovsky, Daniel, Rusakov, Kurilius, Stepan, Yatsky,
These ancient prison walls have watched them all pass by, and many of them were much stronger men than I. But they lived without hope, alone inside this cell. But I've a vision of my home in Israel. My friends, we know what silence brings. Another Hitler waiting in the wings. So stand up now and shout it to the sky. They may bring us to our knees, but we'll never die.